together is really valuable and helpful to you. In terms of time, we're really happy to be flexible. We allowed an hour and a half. However, let's just go with what suits you and with the flow of the conversation, because today, you know, it's quite a relaxed and informal conversation. We wanted to allow a time to dive in a little bit further, you know, expand on the conversation we started in the last session, but also just really make it a conversation and have some time to allow some time for you to ask questions and fundamentally to talk over in a little bit more detail some of the particulars around the Safe Work Australia guidelines as we understand them. Brad and Glenys in our team have excuse me, I'm just getting rid of something here, have done some really good work in helping us and our clients interpret the new Safe Work Australia guidelines, which are particularly around preventing and eliminating workplace harassment and aggression. And the twinned guidelines that were released in February this year by Safe Work Australia match the guidelines. They marry up to the guidelines for preventing and eliminating workplace bullying. But as we all know, you know, in so much of our journey as leaders, the devil is in the detail, and it is the detail when it comes to the topic of workplace bullying is particularly vexing for leaders, you know, around the world. So in the conversation today, essentially we'll achieve three things. I'll hand you over to Brad shortly, and Brad is going to share the checklist with you that we shared after the last session. The checklist is a product that Glenys and Brad put together after their review of the new guidelines to extract out of it practical pointers that really speak to the requirements of leaders when it comes to meeting the guidelines to best practice standards. Then so in sharing those guidelines, that checklist with you, then we'll open up for discussion. We want you to lead us and sort of, you know, go to some of the items on the checklist and ask questions and start a conversation. And then finally, because simply it would be remiss of us if we didn't take the opportunity, we want to spend a little bit of time explaining our partnership with the Bully Zero Foundation and the support we have from the chair of the heads of workplace safety authorities Australia and New Zealand, and the relationship and consultation exercise that has brought to life the Bully Zero Culture of Excellence program that is provided through the National Bully Zero Foundation with the support of Hauser, and in which we are essentially involved in delivery. So we want to make sure that you have that information from us so that we don't miss that important opportunity. But to get it started, I just wanted to share with you a snippet from a conversation I was having last night with two wonderful scholars and academics in the UK. One of whom is my PhD supervisor and quite a leader globally in the applied neurosciences. Paul Brown is his name, Professor Paul Brown, and Paul and I were having a conversation about, of course, as is a favourite topic of mine, the vexed topic of bullying and how we understand bullying. And my own research is very focused on using neuroscience, the applied neuroscience field, to help us develop a more specific typology of workplace bullying and what I fundamentally call signals of threat and threat behaviours in workplace contexts. So in this conversation, Paul was telling me about a recent case just in the last week or so in the UK in which the CEO of the British Psychological Society had announced his decision to resign. And the backdrop of the story was that the CEO has come under heavy public criticism for bullying, for being a leader who has been bullying his executive and staff. And Paul was describing very briefly the pattern that was swirling around this decision, the heavy attacks of this gentleman on social media, and in the mainstream media also, the shaming of this fellow. And and Paul was making the comment, what's really, yet again, here, what's so challenging is that there's little detail, there's little explanation around how this CEO, how this executive leader has been committing acts of bullying. What are they? What has he done? So there's been a, complaint and heavy criticism and accusation, but little specificity to support the complaints that's certainly been available in the news sources and information that Paul has been consuming, or that anyone would be consuming. And I was saying to Paul, well, the reports may lack that detail, that the description of what his patterns of bullying might look like. But I'm going to be able to now give you a very specific description of the bullying that he will be receiving at the moment. And I said, let's imagine we transport him to Australia and he is being interviewed on the 7:30 report by our Lee Sales here in Australia. And forgive me if any of you are huge devotees of Lee Sales. She has her moments, but I'm going to describe some behaviours here that I think do not support respectful behaviour in our society and community at the moment. So I could say if he was in that interview chair, here's what would happen. He'd be welcomed with a frosty tone of voice. He would then attempt to respond with a smile and a thank you very much for having me. And then Lee would fire her first question out, and it would be a question with no expression on her face, or indeed with an expression of latent hostility, with a very cold, curt and clipped tone of voice, and very standoffish body language. And he would attempt to answer that question, but before he completed that question, he would likely to be interrupted and receive a response like, but aren't you saying? So a negatively framed question, or that's actually a loaded criticism intended to, because it starts with a negative premise, but undermine the credibility of his statement. And then he will attempt to answer that question, and he may be interrupted again, or indeed Lee at that point, if he does answer it, will go and answer a different question, ask a different question, and she will not have acknowledged the answer that he gave. It will be as though he didn't even speak. And then he will then go and perhaps attempt to say something further to make a case or respond to a criticism she's made. And Lee may well, in the interview at that point, roll her eyes or give a look of sort of, if you like, of slight mockery or derision to essentially ridicule or send a signal of disrespect and question a level of disregard or questioning of the comment made. And at this point, he, as the subject of the interview, will be in, of course, an extraordinary heightened threat response. His brain's resources will be profoundly redirected away from the prefrontal cortex regions in which his fastest thinking, creativity and problem solving and communication skills belong, and will be redirected down into his sympathetic nervous system, and his heart will be racing, his throat will be tight, which will be affecting his ability to speak clearly and enunciate, and his palms will be sweating, his stomach will be in knots, and his breathing will be rapid and shallow. And at that point, all of the resources that he needs and the acuity of faculty required in such a high pressure situation will be taken from him, and the interview will close. Now, that's a very specific, high level sort of then very public pattern I've just described, but I think it's a really important one for us to think about and understand, because we see in this country, I would suggest it wouldn't be a fortnight wouldn't go by where we don't hear in the press of a leader, yet another leader, being publicly vilified, and commonly the complaint of that leader is around their leadership of a culture of bullying and harassment. And sadly, in my professional life over the years of leading a coach and the opportunity I've had to support many CEOs and organisation leaders in different sectors, sadly, all too many times that work has involved sitting with a CEO and executive, helping them because they have been in the firing line of such criticisms. And I can tell you that in the majority of those cases, the criticisms and the complaints lack any specifics. There is no, but they will have risen up because perhaps a handful of staff in the organisation have gone public with criticisms or gone to a union and agitated up a set of complaints around the B word, bullying. And it's certainly, I'm certainly not suggesting that that staff won't have identified some legitimate concerns that need addressing. I'm not suggesting that I ever work with leaders who preside over the perfect culture, because that doesn't exist. But what I have grown very tired of over the years is seeing leaders, supervisors, managers, and leaders criticised for supporting or allowing a culture of bullying or practicing bullying themselves without the detail or case to really explain what that looks like. Because I think we have fundamentally enormous problem when it comes to the very first dot point on Brad's checklist, which is the need for leaders to give specific descriptions of bullying behaviours and negative communication behaviours in the workplace. Until we have those specific descriptions, until we have that understanding of what bullying is and is not, we cannot arrest these problems. We cannot support positive and socially safe behaviours. We can't practice, we can scarcely practice and model them and exhort others in our organisation to practice them if we don't have an accurate understanding of what they are. So I've treated you to that long-winded story just to really put on the table that one of the key takeouts we want to leave with you today is to get specific around what respectful behaviour looks like and what respectful behaviour doesn't look like, and support you with that understanding. So without any further ado, I might hand over to you, Brad. Brad is going to share the checklist with you and just pick a few topics, a few points from it to dive in and start building our insight and some sort of shared awareness around these important points. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Lee. So the checklist I'm referencing was sent to each of you, but I'll leave it up on the screen as we talk. But yell out to me on the comments if you would like me to send it to you specifically or you don't have it. But it's a really simple way of sort of unpacking what is quite a comprehensive guideline in terms of what you should practically look for as leaders within the walls of your organization to make sure that you are, I guess, compliant and meeting the expectations of the guidelines. But likely, I'm going to start with a little bit of a story to give you a frame of reference for what we do when we talk about the checklist. And it involves my grandmother, who is 95 next month. So just to give you some contextual sort of a sort of background to the story. So I grew up with my grandparents looking after me after school every day. And one of the signatures of my grandmother, there was two signatures. One, we were only allowed to buy Golden Circle because my grandfather worked for Golden Circle. So even as a grown adult, I still am unable to purchase anything but Golden Circle because it's been deeply instilled in me. And second is that my grandmother made pikelets that were the most phenomenal you could ever imagine. And I don't know, and you know, to the envy of everybody in the neighborhood and to my friends, etc. And it was a feature of every family party. And I think for multiple years, it was what I requested as my birthday present, and nothing else. And when she started to become much older and she is in a home, so she doesn't do the cooking anymore. And there was a lot of sort of family debate about who the recipe for these famed pikelets went to. And she gifted it to two of us. I was one and another cousin of mine, and it was our obligation to bring the pikelet recipe forward and our obligation to make sure that future family parties, etc. Bear with me, the story is more exciting than the pikelets. But and she gave me the recipe and you know, completely in long-handed, you know, grandmother sort of script to a level of detail. And I diligently sat down and followed the recipe to make said pancakes with the expectation not only of myself, but the rest of the family that I would, with the recipe, be able to take that forward and recreate these famed pikelets, bring them to the party, and it would be like, you know, this is exactly what the baton has been passed and this would be a good thing. Turns out it didn't work. I don't know why. I followed the recipe to the letter, but it didn't give me the said result. And so I sort of regrouped and asked my grandmother to, in the preceding weeks, to sit with me and actually guide me through the process. Lo and behold, the result was far improved, and we were much closer to the mark in terms of said famed pikelets. Now, what that story says to me and what I'm trying to demonstrate for you is, I guess we can have all of the sort of expectations that we want, and you know, you can comfortably provide clear instructions about, you know, in this case, how to make the pikelets, and you know, in other cases, what respectful behavior looks like, or how to operate with a level of courtesy, and you can have organizational values in place. I guess what's missing for me, and what I have found in many conversations with countless leaders across countless sectors, is I guess the difference between a set of prescribed instructions or a set of expectations and a set of values, and the difference between that and an actual confidence and a capability. So what I wanted to chat to you about this morning, and certainly what is a take-home theme for me that is the undertone of the checklist, is about creating that confidence and that capability and that shared language for how we are respectful and how we prevent acts of bullying and bad behavior in our workplace. Not only in terms of how we engage in conversations, but also our responsibility as leaders to encourage a culture where it's not allowed at any level of conversation, so water cooler right through to boardroom, and even how we equip our people with the capability and confidence to stand up when those behaviours are witnessed by them and being experienced by others. And I think it's important that as much as we can say, and most organisations can comfortably acquit against this, I have a good behaviour policy, I have, you know, clear sets of values, I have a code of conduct. I'm not suggesting that your governance isn't in place that is robust. What I'm saying is there's a conversation that needs to happen about how you bring that to life. So what does it look and sound and feel like when those values, those behaviours, that code of conduct is sort of is committed to and enacted on a day-to-day basis, and not just in the nice conversations. Like Lee said, you know, the idea that, you know, we only have positive conversations, or that we're only allowed to traverse subjects that are really, you know, easy for us and where there's common, you know, understanding and a commitment of idea. That's not the case. I want a healthy exchange of ideas. I want a debate of opinions. I want robust challenge of ideas. I want people to feel comfortable to be able to bring their thoughts to the table, even when they're challenging what might be the status quo or the majority view. And all of that means that we really need to be equipping our people with the confidence and the capability to have those conversations, even when the subject matter is somewhat, controversial, or where we have to challenge someone's opinion, or where someone's behaviour might be pushing the boundaries of what's appropriate. So if you think about it, the first sort of one that stands out for me is clarify what behaviours are not bullying. Now, it seems so fundamentally simple, but one of the biggest pieces of feedback I get from leaders is, there's two extremes in any organisation around bullying. And one is that people run to the B word and, very quickly suggest that even the most reasonable of management action is a B word. And that they run to that as some sort of, waving of a flag, either for attention or to excuse bad behaviour on their behalf. Or the other end of that extreme is that people run, away from the B word. They're so concerned about all of the connotations. We're worried about the relationship. They're worried about their employment security. They don't know what if that really is. They just excuse it and suggest that, oh, that's just John, or that's just Susie. That's just how they are. One of our colleagues, Russell, says there's multiple personalities. There's 1,000 ways that you can work. There's, everybody's individual different styles and personalities. I don't want to, dismiss any of those, but none of them are an excuse for you to be rude or to abandon professional courtesy. So there isn't a style of leadership that allows you to be disrespectful. It's not just John and John's ways. If John's talking like that, or if you feel like John's aggressive, or his tone is inappropriate, or his manner is disrespectful, then, as disappointing as it is, John's a bully. It's not just John's style of working. So I think one of the things that is really important is that we really understand what is or isn't bullying, so that we understand if we are either a perpetrator of or a victim of, or thirdly, we are witnessing events or acts of bullying and bad behaviour, and what do we do as a bystander in that situation? Because I think what's really important is that we empower everybody in a room. So there's almost this belief that as leaders, we have the ultimate responsibility, or HR professionals have the ultimate responsibility to arbitrate or step in or, challenge someone's behaviour who might be disrespectful or who's demonstrating bad behaviour. And that means that in an organisation of 1,000 people, there's about a dozen who, are technically able to say, Leanne, I need to probably pull you up on that behavior, or, I need to have a conversation with you about how you're engaging in that with Jan, or etc. And that's just that's unreasonable of that, 12 people to ask. I think what we focus on, and certainly the work that we do, is about making sure that everybody in that room, so all 1,000 of those people, are, capable and confident and equipped with a shared language that means they know how to call out a bad behavior if it's happening to them, or if they're witnessing it happening to somebody else. And they know how to do that in a respectful, safe and courteous way. They know what the expectations of appropriate behavior are. They know what, terms like respect, courtesy, civility, we know what that looks and sounds and feels like. And we have a language for how we do that in good conversations, and when our conversations become heated, or where we've got a difference of opinion or idea. So we know how to traverse even the most challenging of subject matter and individuals, because we have very clear guidelines. But more than the guidelines, we've moved beyond the rhetoric of just the words on the page, and we've been able to be clear about, okay, how do we practice those expectations? So what does it look like when I need to be able to, exchange in our conversation about difference of opinions, and how do I do that in a way where I'm deeply passionate about my issue, but I really want to hear the other person's view and I want to get my point across. So how do I have that conversation in a way that doesn't abandon courtesy, that doesn't intimidate somebody else, that doesn't stop someone from bringing forward their ideas? And how do I maintain a relationship in that space so that I can keep being productive and professional in my workplace? I think another key point for me is about, the pickup at the early end. A lot of our work is very much at the, early intervention end of the sort of continuum. And that's great, because for me, that's really about making sure that people are very clear in terms of what's expected, and making sure that we're, socially disallowing bad behaviors and bullying, and so that we're equipping everybody with the confidence and the capability. But often we'll be brought in at the end where the relationship is so broken, and where, people feel so mistreated or so disengaged that, we have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money to be able to get that person to re-engage in terms of the team dynamic and re-engage in what is being productive and professional in the workplace. And I think so often we have to be brought in at the end where the relationship is so severed that our work is tenfold what it should be. Because really, if we would have created the right conversation up front and equipped people with the capability and the confidence, then it's a much simpler transaction to have at that end than it is down that track to say, okay, well, now I have to not only, repair the relationship, I now have to rebuild the team. And I also have to equip everybody with that capability and that confidence as well. It's a one step further that makes it much more challenging.
Absolutely. Brad, sorry, Brad, I'm just going to jump in and really interrupt you to just pick up a really good question that Melissa Me has posted. How do you suggest people navigate poor behaviours in one-on-one settings when the integrity is in question, i.e. how they act in front of others is not the same as how they're acting in a one-on-one setting?
That is a great question.
It sure is. So Melissa Me, and correct me if I need to change my pronunciation. I talked before about, I was giving you some examples of, typical behaviours practiced by journalists in broadcast interviews. It's actually a side note, a topic I feel quite passionately about, because my very first profession was indeed communications and journalism, and didn't spend long on that patch at all, because really at a level of values, I just couldn't sit comfortably with the kind of behaviours and approaches that seemed to typify the profession. But, I described some behaviours around, for example, I was going to some detail looking at facial expressions, how tone of voice is used, how someone's face can be used to withhold warmth and be very cold and abrupt, and clipped in voice. They're just a few examples of a network of behaviours that somebody intending to make another feel inferior and inadequate can use consciously or unconsciously. The point there for me is, as we've been discussing, is to get specific. And to get specific politely. So I would ask you to think about, if you had to describe this poor behaviour that you've mentioned, how would you describe it? What word would you use that's neutral, that's not directed as a criticism, but is an accurate description of what you are experiencing? And that's where words like abrupt and curt or short, or it may be a condescending tone of voice. These are descriptions that we can use that aren't loaded, but they but they do help bring clarity and lay bare the fundamental problem that's occurring in the exchange. And remembering that when we talk about definitions of bullying, any broadly understood and accepted definition of bullying involves the proposition that bullying is an unwelcomed, unwanted behaviour that is directed in a pattern towards from one person to another target or targets consistently and repeatedly over time. So to be having a conversation like this, fundamentally what's on the table and what's likely and behind the question is that there is a repetition, there's a pattern in play of receipt of this behaviour. So that means it absolutely warrants addressing, and it is absolutely important to address it. So you can feel right and comfortable that it is your professional obligation to kindly raise this. So back to the specific point and what that question, what that conversation could look like, could go something like this. And I'm foregrounding here specificity and respect in the conversation to this person, to the person you're addressing. For instance, they have to say, I'm really troubled by something here. We work closely together. I really value working with you, but I have to let you know that it really makes me uncomfortable. I often notice when it was just between the two of us that your voice changes and you become quite abrupt or clipped, and your answers are very short, and it makes me feel really uncertain, and I'm worried that perhaps there's something behind that and there's an issue that we need to address. If you've got a concern with me, please let's talk about it, because I'm have to say I'm really struggling with this, and if you're uncomfortable, if you're upset with me, I hate to think that was the case for your sake. What you've done there is you've actually committed an act of kindness with respect and care for self and the other. And you've gone to a level of detail in describing a behavior that's appropriate and necessary for you to share. Now, regardless of the response that person gives you, there is absolutely, and you've achieved a very important thing there by creating a shared awareness between the two of you about what is occurring. Once that is said, once you've used those words and shared that description, they can't be unsaid. They are known and shared now in a conscious awareness between you. So it makes it very difficult for that person to repeat that behavior towards you again, knowing that it's out there.
I think
Sorry, Brad.
No, that's fine, because it turns out that might have been a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. Because right. I think in that situation, I think people would know what is an appropriate level of behavior and what isn't. But the question was more, I guess, we know what our code of conduct is. We know what our organizational values are. We know what it feels like to be respected and to be respectful in the workplace. But there are always those, I guess, interactions or those challenging workplace situations about the how. And I think that's where the capability and the confidence comes in, and where we need a shared language for how you might be able to respectfully call out what you feel like is a behavior of concern, or where you feel like the treatment is different from that other people are receiving. Or, for example, where you do feel like, there's just a matter I need to put on the table because I'm worried that there's a level of treatment that's different, or I'm experiencing something that feels a bit off for me and I want to put that on the table. So rather than allow that to fester and potentially impact the relationship to a point where it's virtually unrepairable, or where we've constantly had our productivity impeded, or that we don't feel like we want to make a contribution, or that we don't want to have conversations with that person because we fear the reaction that may come from that. I guess what we're talking about is equipping everybody with the skills, Leanne, that you demonstrated, which is there's a conversation we need to have here. I need to air where I feel uncomfortable, and I need to do so in a way that's safe and respectful, and where I feel confident and capable to table issues, so that behavior, I guess, can be called out early, or where we can put on the table where both of us feel uncomfortable, and hopefully, come to a resolution that allows us to go back and be productive and professional in our workplace. So I think, by all means, it was a perfect example of what we're talking about. And I think the how is often the sort of missing step for us, because we see so many organizations have all of the ingredients there. And to take me back to the story at the start, it's not that I didn't have the right recipe, it's that I didn't have the confidence and the capability to be able to bring that recipe to life in a way that my grandmother had for decades, until someone showed me how to do that. So with that small modicum, or that small adjustment, I was able to take all of the things that I already had, but I felt much more confident to be able to execute the recipe because I had witnessed what it was like, and what happens when, you know, the flour goes here or where the butter goes here. Suddenly the recipe was brought to life in a way that had color and movement, and I felt, you know, I understood it more because we had actually had a conversation about, well, how do I bring the recipe to life? And in the same way, when we talk about bullying and bad behavior, you can have all of the governance in place, you know, that makes for a really robust organization. But the critical for us really is the opportunity to practice that, to understand what it looks, sounds, and feels like when we're respectful to each other and when we are respected. And I think, you know, those sort of stories are a perfect illustration of the multiple challenging conversations or fraught areas that we want to try and navigate with confidence and grace. And we need a shared language to do that.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much, Brad.
Lee, there's another question. Do you want to field the question before we move through to the next? Are you looking
Thanks,
at the question at the same
Thank
time?
you. Yes. Thanks, Leanne and Brad. Younger employees do feel that they may lose their jobs if they question more experienced leaders, absolutely, on their behaviours. Cultivating a culture that supports speaking up is key here. Amen to that. Amen to that, Melissa. I'll describe the approach we take as both as need to know information and as illustrative for you here. So we mentioned briefly in the last conversation our Class Act conduct program. The very purpose of that program is to achieve the three important things we're highlighting here. Create a shared awareness around workplace communication behaviour, to create a shared language around workplace communication behaviour, and to create a shared responsibility for workplace communication behaviour. So going back to that first piece about awareness, you know, that very much, that awareness is important. I love to be the optimist and the glass half full girl on each and every occasion. But I have to say that, you know, Martin Seligman's proposition that in order to build the positive, we must attend to the negative is fundamentally important in the space of addressing workplace communication behaviour. I believe it's absolutely critical to create an awareness of what we call in Class Act negative communication behaviours at work. Because we can do all of the positive communication skilling training we like, and we can fill those sessions up with some really terrific tips and insights. But unless we expose our understanding to each other of what goes wrong, we don't have the material to socially disallow those very behaviours. And we haven't established in the emotional brain the material to make us want to disallow those things, to practice the good stuff. So that shared awareness is key, and of course married to it the shared language. So with Class Act, through the form it takes is in an online, a core module online that is an interactive online module in which all staff participate with this very purpose. Class Act shares 8 communication principles. The first, as some of you already know, is manner before matter, recognising that in any communication exchange, we have 2 things occurring. We have the subject matter we're discussing and the subject manner we're treating each other in. The manner we're treating each other in as we discuss. And Class Act spotlights manner and recognises that none of the subject matters we discuss require us to abandon respect and courtesy in our manner. So we are decoupling the subject from the behaviour, and in so doing spotlighting the importance of our manner towards each other. That spotlighting, because the content in Class Act is very honest and specific around, okay, so what do some of these negative communication behaviours look like? They look like when someone walks into the tea room in the morning and they say good morning, and you say good morning and they don't reply to you and walk back out again. They look like that same person who is always the one who has something negative to say in a meeting towards any suggestion that's put forward. They look like when you walk into a workspace and there's 3 people huddled together in the conversation and you enter and they pull apart and they don't turn to acknowledge you. Well, they look like when you're in a team discussion and you make a suggestion and no one replies to it. They might look like simply when you speak, there's one person who changes their facial expression, who drops warmth or who drops responsiveness or even a smile or a welcoming, or a welcoming facial gesture, or, a cold tone of voice in response. So I'm carping on about this because it is so important to be really clear, and that's what Class Act does. It creates a really shared clarity around negative behaviours. Not saying that we all get them right. It allows for the fact that we all get them wrong at times, but what we must be alert to when these behaviours are occurring in a pattern direct from one person, that's a same person or persons, to another on repeat, then we have patterns in place that are absolutely the formation of workplace bullying and must be addressed and disallowed. So creating that, in terms of the question around younger employees who don't feel they've got that same social status or power to influence in their workplace environment, changes everything for them, because at that transparency, what we've done through Class Act is empowered everybody. We've said that it doesn't matter who you are or where you sit in the life of your or role of your organisation, none of you should turn up to work expecting disrespect or tolerating it when it comes to you in a pattern of behaviour. We have grace, we show grace and tolerance and forbearance with one another, recognising that all of us will slip and trip up in our communication behaviour accordingly, but the transparency is around having our eyes to it, to be clear about what can and does go wrong in workplace communication behaviours in patterned behaviour. That way it's very much more comfortable, and I suggest that in terms of language for a young employee or a junior employee addressing behaviours up the line, that it should start with the statement around respect. So, for example, look, I really so want to do my best here for you. I want to give you the answers you need, the support you need. But I have to say, I struggle to do that when you start yelling at me or raising your voice towards me, for instance. Or it makes me uncomfortable. And then I get confused, I get stressed, and actually I do a worse job for you. So please help me be the best I can be. Now, those conversations are really difficult when we're trying to have them from a standing start and we don't have a shared awareness of what unacceptable behaviour is here. But they become a lot more comfortable, and you're surprisingly comfortable and accessible to anyone in the organisation, in the workplace, where there is firstly the understanding about unacceptable behaviours, but also the endorsement from leaders that you are entitled to kindly, in a caring and respectful way, raise problems of bad manner in your workplace. With that support and authorisation, the support for kind conversations, then they are available to everybody.
And I think it also, probably a key point is how and when those conversations occur. So Leanne sort of spoke about what might be an appropriate way to table that conversation, but I guess as the shared language also gives you a bit more confidence in terms of how to navigate that conversation. So even though Lee's, description of how that conversation might be able to be brought to life is pitch perfect, we need to be mindful that how that's delivered, so the approach that you take, the timing, the location for that, all of those things are important as well. So for example, if you are going to potentially raise concerns around the behavior of a senior officer, and you are someone who either, from an age perspective or from a classification perspective, sit below that person, then how do you do so in a way that respects that conversation as much as that person? So, is it when you're in the heat of the moment? So, when there's been a particular incident, or where that person's firing emails at you, or where they're screaming something down the phone, and your emotion is front and center, which really makes it challenging for you to be the strongest communicator that you can be. Some of these conversations aren't easy, and so you really need to pick the time and the place for when that conversation happens. And Lee, I'm sure you agree, sometimes it's about, I need to find the appropriate time in a way that's actually going to make sure that that person is able to digest and really take the feedback on board, and that the conversation doesn't necessarily threaten that person's ego or that person's sense of safety. So for example, it may not be that you would call that person's behavior out in a team meeting in front of 12 other staff members. It might not be that you do that in the heat of the moment when you feel particularly stressed and anxious. And that maybe it's better in a one-on-one environment to table it at the end of the week and say, look, Lee, I really respect you. I really value working with you, but there's a couple of things that I really feel like I need to put on the table and just, flesh out and see, what we can do here. And one of those is how you talk to me. And, sometimes that challenges my ability to do my best, which really impacts me because that's what I'm here for. And, you as an organization are very much purpose driven. And I think that's a really valuable sort of advantage for you as a collection of people, because everybody there, in terms of how they contribute to your organization, is there with a deep and unwavering commitment to the organization in the purpose that it exists and the values that you hold firm. And I think that gives you, just like Class Act, for example, gives you the playbook and the language and the confidence to be able to bring the conversation, you can always link it to the fact that, there's a purpose that connects all of you there. And behaviors that are inconsistent with that, or that challenge my ability to feel safe and innovative and, mentally capable to contribute my best, really means that's going to be impacting the organization. And that's not something anybody wants to do. And that's a non-negotiable for everybody at the table. Does that make sense, Lee?
Absolutely. someone reminded me recently of the verse, perfect love casts out fear. And I think that's a powerful and wonderful proposition when it comes to fearlessly having these conversations, because I'm a strong believer in the fact that compassion is power, good power. Compassionate conversations and focusing our eye in on the other, even if when that other is, believe it or not, even though when that other is a source of intimidation to you or to other people, there's an eye that you're given through which you can see, in a state of compassion and empathy, that person's vulnerability and insecurity. Because I will promise you this, it is that vulnerability and insecurity at base driving threat behaviours from one person to another. I truly believe that, both from experience and practice and from the neuroscience, that people who practice threat behaviours cyclically in the parietal regions of the brain, there's a strong fMRI studies show that, for want of a better term, I'll just use that, bullies who have perpetrated bullying behaviours in a pattern over time in an overt way, that that posterior parietal cortex is highly engaged, and that posterior parietal cortex region has a strong role to play in reproducing an extinguished fear memory, further suggesting that fear and insecurity is a base non-conscious brain driver for bullying behavior. So take that eye. When you see somebody, when you have to approach someone for that conversation around the toughest of all things, their behavior, bring that forward compassionately in your heart and mind, that this person is vulnerable, but in fact, in this setting, you are not. And that your job here is to take care of them, and in so doing, take care of the people around them in your care. That regardless of your role, you have a responsibility to. That focus of compassion, that practice of perfect love casts out fear in the brain. And other studies that are really fascinating, have fascinated me, and I've been drawn to over the past 18 months or so, show that in the frontal regions of the brain, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex seems to have two key dual functions. The practice of cognitive empathy, you might call that consciously practiced empathy, and the downward regulation of fear, or the threat response, further suggesting that, in fact, in a state of compassion and empathy, the first thing to go is fear. That's why I say compassion is power. It's mighty, given material to change relationships, change behavior patterns between two people, between you and another person or a team, to everyone's collective benefit.
And Lee, I think, your point you made there reminded me of a Simon Sinek quote that says, as leaders, our job is not to be in charge, but to take care of those in our charge.
Yes.
And I think, so much of what we've spoken about is that level of compassion and empathy, but being able to afford people, I guess, a way of being able to do that. And I think as leaders, one of the things that we can do as an act of compassion is to equip people with the capability and the confidence to, I guess, have socially safe and respectful workplaces, and to call out behaviours that are inconsistent with that, regardless of what level, what sort of hierarchy is at place, regardless of the sort of organisational dynamics or landscape, that no conversation, no person, is above basic standards of courtesy and civility and respect. And I think, so often we use terms like respect and courtesy, and I think sometimes that can be sort of just noise in the background, and everybody's like, oh, yep, upon reflection, my behavior is entirely respectful, or my view of what I've said or how I've said it is respectful. And I think that's why it's important that you can't just use that word and hide behind that word and then have an expectation that everybody understands your version of that word and operates in a way that is consistent with how you believe that word comes to life in an organization. So, there's a dozen people on this call. Every single one of us have a different version of what might be respectful conversation in the workplace, and how that happens, and what you expect in terms of respectful conversations, and how you deliver respectful conversations. So with that, an opportunity to be really clear about what respect looks, sounds, and feels like, what our shared language for respectful conversations look like, how we maintain respect even when we have a challenge of ideas or a difference of opinion. That's really, I guess, where things like Class Act and our work mean that your organization is equipped with all of that capability and the confidence to be able to navigate all of those different factors that are work. I say to Lee all the time, I wish I could give organizations just good conversations, or just nice things to talk about, and that's just not a contemporary workplace. I think it's really important that we focus on giving you confidence and capability to hold firm to the very values that your organization sets, but even in the most challenging of circumstances.
It's a great point. There's a I think a common misapprehension that we even unconsciously hold to is that the kind thing to do is stay polite. Staying polite equals staying compliant, even if the pattern that we're experiencing is something that we know at base we shouldn't be complying with. And so, you know, there's a real clarity for me that often the kind thing to do is actually the courageous thing to do. The kind thing to do, the thing that takes care of the other person or others in your midst, is to certainly be polite, but to politely have the hard conversation with courage and compassion. And I've often had over the years, you know, Adventist leaders from various sectors and states say to me, a problem we have here is that we're all just too polite. You know, we just don't want to give people bad feedback, or, you know, so we'll just sort of put up with it because we're all just so unfailingly polite. And I feel really strongly about this. This is not a weakness in the Adventist education culture in which we have mostly worked. This is not a weakness. It's a strength. It's an asset, just one to be directed with perhaps greater purpose, so that it doesn't just play out capriciously, but it plays out strategically with purpose, because we all need to and want to be treated politely, all of us, and indeed deserve to. But polite is exactly what we need. Kind is what we need. Courteous is what we need, applied to those breakthrough conversations. That this is the issue we need to reset. This is tough. It's uncomfortable for me. No doubt it will be for you. This is a really awkward conversation, quite frankly, but I'm bringing it to you with love and care and respect, because I think we don't have it, it's going to hurt us both and potentially others. That's polite done the right way with purpose.
Because there's a fine line between compliance and being complicit. And I think, you know, there's the behavior that you walk past is the behavior that you allow. And that the idea that feedback or that conversation about calling someone's behavior, it really is an act of compassion, because through that awareness, there's an opportunity for that person to reflect and consciously commit to trying to calibrate themselves differently so that their behavior is improved, or that the way that they engage with you is potentially different. And I'm not suggesting there's going to be an immediate flip, or that every conversation you have is going to be someone going, I'm so deeply moved by the fact that you've raised this with me. And thank you so much. Some of those conversations, as much as compassion is certainly your driving force, will be uncomfortable, and they will be difficult, and it will feel horrible in the moment. But ultimately, it allows that person, consciously or not, and it might not be the first thing they do, but it might be the next or the third or the fourth thing they do, where they go, maybe I do need to watch my tone, or maybe I do need to calibrate my conversation differently, or maybe I do need to be more mindful of how I'm coming across, because that's not my intention. The idea that there's people that are being deliberately aggressive, or that they're going out of their way to be negative, etc. It's rare that we have that sort of entrenched bully that is just deliberately and maliciously and unrelentingly being difficult. Don't get me wrong, those people exist, but they're a rarity. Most of the time, it's a lack of consciousness, or it's, that people are allowing context as an excuse. And the moment that it's brought to the table again in a way that's compassionate and purposeful and meaningful and genuine in the conversation, most people immediately use that as a point of self-reflection, and you'll find that their behavior calibrates almost immediately. And certainly you'll see a difference in terms of how that person engages with you in terms of, much more favorably. And the other point I wanted to say before I throw back to you, Lee, on that point is often we have conversations with people where and leaders and HR professionals about this expectation that people have about, oh, they want a great culture, they want to come to work and they want to feel safe and they want to feel valued and they want to feel respected and they want to feel engaged and they want their work to be meaningful and they want to feel like they're contributing to the purpose. Now, as leaders and as an organization, you have an inherent responsibility to create a structure that allows that to happen. But also what we find is that we need to remind people that every single person is responsible for contributing to that very culture idea that people have. So if you want a culture that is socially safe and it's respectful and where there's a free flow of ideas and difference of opinions and people feel valued and respected regardless of their sort of background or their hierarchy or their contribution to the organization, then you have a responsibility no matter what level you are, no matter what age you are, no matter what, so no matter how busy you are, no matter how, pressured you are, no matter how anxious you are, you have a responsibility to create that culture. And we need to make sure that you're equipped with all of the knowledge, all of the confidence, all of the process and procedures that allow you to do that. And I think that's really, that's for me, the sort of subtext of the checklist. Yes, there's a number of things that you can suggest are black and white that you can clinically have in place, but how those things are lived and breathed and how people can physically contribute to the very culture that they want and hold firm to, and how you can traverse conversations even when they become challenging, and the mindfulness about how that conversation takes place and the compassion of that feedback. All of that is a sort of a next level conversation that equips people to be able to really honor those values that your organization has put up in line.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad. All great insights. I just want to check in with everybody to ask if you're comfortable to stay on the call. I'm conscious if anyone does need to leave to the next thing, do feel comfortable to. But most importantly, I would just like to open up and invite questions from any of you. And while you're thinking about what questions or suggestions or ideas or comments might be important for you to share, I just want to build on something Brad mentioned. Brad, you very rightly talked about the discomfort, of the conversation, and yes, recognizing that it's going to be that we're going to approach it uncomfortably. I just wanted to speak into that for a moment and talk about the importance that I have found in simply allowing the discomfort and normalizing it. I often colloquially describe the limbic brain, which is responsible for the processing and interpreting of all signals and material, in fact, but certainly communication signals from other humans. I've described those limbic systems as both our best friend and our greatest enemy, because those regions, many of those regions of the limbic brain are so phenomenally designed and purposed to scan and identify any potential threats in behaviors from others. And the amygdala, as a processing center in the human brain, seems to direct a phenomenal amount of its resources to, in fact, quite specifically, the human face. A lot of the brain gathers an enormous amount of information from the facial expressions of others, because we want to identify if we are safe or vulnerable in their presence. And of course, in a patterned interaction, the amygdala will sort for us in no fraction of a second that we could even measure that we indeed are vulnerable and will trigger a threat response. So the limbic system is always doing this vigilant, mighty job of keeping us safe while alerting us to threats. However, it becomes our greatest enemy insofar as it sets up, by the time all that circuitry, that safety circuitry is set up and woven into the cortical pathways, synapse by synapse, it's very difficult to change it. So, and the response that it uses to keep us safe in a non-conscious pattern is that of compliance. So we will comply with the behavior, the threat behavior we're receiving. We will sit back under it. We will produce a compliant response to the center of that behavior, because the brain wants to choose the shortest, most efficient route out for us. The brain chooses the shortest and most efficient route to anything. So it certainly does to our survival. And so what happens there is, by the time, if ever, but by the time we become conscious of this pattern of threat, and we're really consciously engaging with it to the degree we are now, and to the degree that you will be, that we are when we go to have the conversation, from a pathway perspective, it feels too late, because that threat response is so woven in that it's difficult to start, if you like, jumping the tracks of those pathways. So simply know that. And my solution to the difficult conversations has been to say to myself, all right, yes, yeah, so I'm going to be nervous. I'm probably going to find my voice sits in my throat. I'm going to find that my chest is tight. My stomach might feel a little bit tight. That's because I'm human, and the brain, through the brain stem, is right now triggering my sympathetic nervous system to be vigilant to a potential threat, knowing that I might be socially vulnerable here. So that's just going to happen. I simply will be. And by invoking that state to the best I can of compassion and care for the other, it is, I believe, the only cognitive power and force available to us to regulate that sense of fear in the response. But go forth anyway, because you'll find somewhere in that conversation, the moment you've got those hardest words out, in spite of yourself and to your surprise, you'll start to feel relief. Even in the difficulty of the conversation, relief will meet you there, because once you've jumped that first hurdle, it will change. Your pathways will start to change and ameliorate threat with a sense of ease, because the tension in you of not addressing has become far greater than the need to address it. So please, questions and comments, thoughts, we'd so welcome them from you.
I was just going to say, Leanne, that hearing what you've been speaking about is all about making that choice to move forward anyway, regardless of how you're actually feeling. Because for me personally, when I'm exceptionally low on energy, dealing with those situations seems just too much. So you're right, telling yourself what to do with that, and that you are going to feel like that, is probably a good way to prepare yourself, but to move forward anyway. Thanks, Brenda. That's so right. And to that point, an important point about being low on energy, I refer often to the research of Professor Ian Shockett at QUT, who is an authority in this space, in the mental health and wellbeing space, in both youth and adults in workplace contexts. And Ian asserts, that from his decades of research, very plainly, that indeed the greatest threat to our well-being is breakdowns in connectedness with those around us. So let's always be mindful that when we're feeling worn down and low on energy and low on those reserves, I would suggest our first is we, if you like, audit our circumstances to identify the cause and address the thing that's most important. Look first to how connected you feel to those around you, because connectedness and belonging in a relationship is absolutely unequivocally the strongest determinant of our well-being. And when it starts, and when there's a fracture or a sense of disconnection or lack of support and belonging in a relationship around us, it will be the first thing that starts to deteriorate our performance and energy. Absolutely, there'll be other factors, the slew of things on your to-do list, the complexity of our working lives, the multifarious demands on us, they're tough.
but we will stand strong in the face of them if our connections around us are strong and our support strong. So, I was speaking to a school principal in a different system recently and giving her some coaching, and she was explaining some real, she'd only been in the role 12 months, and she was explaining the issues she was addressing with her team and with some frustration she was having about the, levels of teacher performance, and some systems and processes that were well underneath where she felt they needed to be. She was explaining, some frustrations about just quality standards that needed to be raised up. And she was talking about some frustrations with a few of the team members. And after she talked it all through and we discussed it, and I'd really acknowledged and understood, the frustrations and issues she'd brought to me, I said, at the end of the session, I said, you've described to me some issues around teaching, around school processes, around how our parents are engaged, around reporting and system requirements, and around, and around teacher interactions. There's 5 projects there, but actually I'm putting to you that there's only one project, and that's project relationship. For now, put down all of these other projects, put down these initiatives. You'll get to them all, but you won't get them unless and until your team's relationships with you are strong. So you only have one thing to do: invest in the relationships, and if there's tough ones, work them. But once you have them, then you'll get to the rest. But you'll never get to the others unless you make that investment your priority.
I think regardless of organization, regardless of sector, regardless of the sort of individuals that make up your teams, conversations, the big and small stuff, is essentially the lifeblood of any team, and it will impact your performance and your people's capability. And so that's why it's so important that we talk about how we talk to each other, and that's why setting very clear expectations and equipping people with the skills and capability to be able to honor those can have such a significant impact on not only the sort of well-being and welfare of your people, but the performance and the productivity of your team.
Absolutely. Other questions or thoughts while we have our time together? I said I'd treat you to a little bit more information about the work we do with the Bully Zero Foundation, and I think it is important, not just because it's a piece of business we do that we want to tell you about, but because it's illustrative of so many of the insights that we've been sharing with you, and I'll want to give you some value in that, as well as describe the program so that you know about it. So, we've described to you a little bit about the Class Act Conduct program, and we could talk long night and day about Class Act. We are so proud of it, and we are so moved to see the impacts it continues to have in the lives of leaders and teams and workforces in the organisations, large and small, that we deliver it to. And as you now well know from the conversation, its purpose is to create that shared awareness and language and responsibility, which it does through efficient participation in online module, through which staff reflect on workplace communication behaviour, learn and acquire new skills and collective insights, not just individual insights, but insights for the collective, and into which they contribute through survey components in Class Act, suggestions and language for a communication charter. what we do with that data, generating a report that comes from our system when we close off participation after several weeks, is we conduct a very careful thematic analysis of that Class Act survey report, which has, of course, captured the anonymous contributions, the qualitative and quantitative data supplied through participation. And it never fails to be moving and uplifting, actually, to see how individuals embrace the opportunity to participate, to have that likely first ever conversation around communication behaviour in their workplace, to tell stories, to reflect, share insights, and contribute their recommendations for words and ideas and principles for the Charter. They're built on the communication principles, of course, that I share through the videos in Class Act. So the product that materialises out of Class Act is very special. That team communication charter means something because it's now an extension of your values. It's now the means to walk and talk the organisation's values in every communication interaction. It's the missing link. So we've been delivering Class Act to tremendous impact, both short and long-term impact, for many years, and seeing significant shrink in negative workplace communication behaviours. The case studies we've done, we find that participants and leaders report, and the data of post-participant surveys report, that the extent of negative communication behaviours and bad manner in the workplace shrink on average from 60% to 20%. And that 93% of participants in Class Act say that they make positive changes to their communication behaviour as a result of their participation and that communication charter. So as we were delivering it over the years, it became very clear that we wanted to take this further and do more with it. And to cut a long story short, the National Bully Zero Foundation found us and the work we were doing, and indeed we found them, and we co-developed a amplified program, an initiative delivered by the Bully Zero Foundation called the Bully Zero Culture of Excellence. And the Class Act Conduct Program is the centrepiece of the Culture of Excellence. And why it's so important? Well, there are several reasons, but one, from a delivery and impact and change point of view, is it takes Class Act and it wraps around comprehensive support so that organisations and teams maximise the impact of that communication charter, the sustained impact over time, the results that they get out of that charter over time, and the ability to continually measure those results over time. So the Culture of Excellence experience starts with getting to know the organisation and its policies and practices so that the delivery really builds on what it's already achieved, builds on its values, its mission and purpose, and is meaningful and makes further meaning of them. It then, on the other side of the rollout of Class Act, which, as I said, is at the centre, then there are some amazing support tools for leaders in the Bully Zero Culture of Excellence that allow leaders to, as I said, really sit down and integrate that communication charter as an outcome product into every aspect of its people and culture, policy and practice, from how it's used to induct new staff so that they're immersed in how we do business and how we speak to each other here, so that it supports supervisors with having those sensitive and difficult performance and feedback conversations, so that it empowers staff across the workplace floor to talk about communication and behaviour and manner wherever it's needed, and where we indeed, through which we support HR leaders and business partners to have those conversations and to support teams to de-escalate problems before they become really costly and formalised for the organisation. So culture of excellence now, as a further achievement which we're really proud of and incredibly excited by, has now come to the attention of the chair of Australia and New Zealand's heads of workplace safety authorities, Martin Campbell, and he has closely reviewed the program and has asserted quite plainly to the Bully Zero Foundation and to us that there is nothing like this program nationally in Australia or New Zealand focused on preventing and eliminating negative workplace behaviours, and is leaning in with his full support to roll it out, including endorsement from Hauser. So it's phenomenal culture change and bullying prevention program. If you are leading a team, then the Bully Zero program in its entirety is not the program for you, but Class Act conduct is. And if you are leading workforces, then it is the program for you, and what it offers you as a workforce leader and what it offers your brand is actually the national brand of the Bully Zero Foundation as a publicly branded Bully Zero culture of excellence, which is not there to a brand for you to use internally and externally, not to suggest that you have the world's first perfect culture, but that you are serious about making ground towards your zero tolerance commitments. So whether you're we would love to talk to you all about these initiatives in further detail if you feel that they have relevance for your team or indeed your organisation. But more importantly, I know, Brad, you will join me in so sincerely thanking each of you for your time today. As I said at the outset, I know how precious time is, and that you've given it some of it to us in your busy day and week to hopefully glean some more insights that are valuable to you, and really spend more time sitting and reflecting in this space of how we treat the manner in which we treat each other at work in our professional lives. It couldn't be a more important topic for you and for your people from an individual well-being perspective, and from the perspective of shoring up the productivity and performance of your people. Because while these problems are in the way, we will never unlock the best of our performance. We'll bring the least of us and not the most. So more important for leaders and team members, it could not be. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. So Brad, we're all happy to sign off now, I think.
Yeah. I think we should end on that note. And I'll reach out to participants today, and if there's any questions, they can continue to field them to me.
Absolutely.
All righty. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks so much, Brenda, Sylvia, Lorraine, Ashley, Lindsay.
Bye, guys.
I get everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
You too.